Good evening. Anthony, did you want me to go ahead with the meeting intro right at 6:30?
How many do we have here? Let's wait a couple of minutes.
Okay.
But then yes.
Okay, you can just let me know when.
Okay, I will do that. Okay, Saida, let's go ahead and start.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. A few notes for you, particularly if this is your first meeting with us. You'll notice that you are muted and unable to mute yourself. After any presentations, the co-chairs, may call on members of the public who wish to speak. You can ask to be recognized by raising your virtual hand, and you can do that by going to the reactions button at the bottom of your screen and selecting raise hand. It's important not to raise your physical hands or wave at the screen because we may not be able to see you among the participants. If you're on the phone, you can raise your hand by pressing *9 and *6 to unmute. Once you're recognized by a co-chair, I will unmute you and you may be prompted to confirm unmuting on your device. If you're using an older version of Zoom, you can access the raise hand feature by clicking the participants button on the menu at the bottom of your screen and selecting raise hand. The chat function is available for technical support only, not to ask questions of the co-chairs. So you can send me a chat if you're having any trouble and I can help troubleshoot things for you. Okay, back to the co-chairs.
Thank you. Thank you, Saida. Welcome to the May meeting of the Zoning and Development Committee of Community Board 8. First, a couple of housekeeping things. We'd like to welcome our new co-chair, Elizabeth, and I would like to welcome our new co-chair, Sharon Pope Marshall, who is now waving, if you can see her. Who was also the recipient of an Our Town Thank You Award from Our Town local newspaper, and we can congratulate her for that. Now, item number one, which I'm introducing, is mine. I was a member of a panel today of the Society of Architectural Historians. And our topic, among other things, among all of the things that we had done during the year, we talked about housing and affordable housing and its effect on neighborhood character. And this was the part of the presentation that, in fact, was mine. And I thought it might be interesting, not as chairman, but as a member of the committee, if I went through it. I promise it'll only take 5 minutes, but I will have to share my screen. Can I do that, or do I need your permission, Saida?
You should be able to do that now.
Oh, great. Okay, let me just fix this. There. Okay. What is lost when we permit overdevelopment? How do we make housing more inclusive and more fair while at the same time preserving the qualities that make living closely packed in a city desirable or even possible? In the absence of federal, state, or local housing programs, we must rely on private for-profit entities for housing creation. In the recurrent housing booms of the last 40 years, very little affordable housing has been built, and developers blame zoning and building codes and local resistance for this deficit. The reality, at least here in New York, is very different. New York is the most densely populated city in the United States by a factor of 3 among cities of more than 1 million people. In fact, were each of the 5 boroughs their own city among the 40 some odd cities with populations in excess of 495,000, just to squeeze Staten Island into the mix. They rank 1st through 4th and 11th. New York does not suffer from a lack of density, but maybe from too much development, as hinted in this quotation by Carlo Molino. I can't help but mention to you all the story behind this photo. Sometime around 1940, Carlo Molino, Italian architect, photographer, and surrealist, asked a friend to take a picture of him wearing his flight suit while standing in front of an aerial photo of Lower Manhattan. So now I get to click. Okay. The charge of NIMBYism and evil zoning restrictions has become a theme in print and online media. It all seems to come from sources close to the real estate development industry, the engine that has driven New York City politics and policy for well over a century. The left bemoans the existence of single-family zones and single-family housing, while New York has almost none. And there is virtually no development pressure on these neighborhoods anyway. Developers are first to last businessmen who want to make as much money as possible. That means new projects in Manhattan, Brooklyn, or the tiny sliver of Queens nearest the East River. Why can't we convert office buildings to housing? It must be the zoning and building codes that prevent it. Way back in the mid-1990s, Donald Trump engineered the purchase, with other people's money, of course, of the Gulf and Western building, pictured here in the upper left. No, it was converted to a hotel and luxury condominiums, lower left. No affordable housing, although nothing in the zoning or building codes prevented it at that location. A couple of decades later, the Mayflower Hotel next door, and you can see the Trump building right here. The Mayflower Hotel next door was torn down and replaced with 15 Central Park West. Nothing affordable here unless you're a billionaire. Well, what happens if you do create new zoning to allow greater density in previously commercial districts? You get this, called Billionaires Row, with buildings by Robert A.M. Stern, Adrian Smith, Shop, and Raphael Vignoli. Apartments in these buildings are barely affordable for billionaires. One apartment at 220 Central Park South, this little guy here, sold for well over $200 million. Zoning changes to allow higher and denser buildings and no affordable units on site. You might counter with the argument that, okay, that's a commercial neighborhood already scarred by insensitive development. What's the excuse for this? Developments on both east and west sides of Manhattan, East 80th Street on the left and Broadway and 100th Street on the right, not overlooking any park and river, and 2 blocks of late 19th century New York destroyed for luxury housing. Hardly any progress here. Maybe we should look at places like Santa Barbara, California, which has introduced average unit density overlays to its zoning, which ensure smaller unit sizes to preserve neighborhood character. An example that shows us all the true cost of development. Wankel's Hardware has been at this location in Yorkville since 1896. The photo on the right dates from sometime in the late 30s, before the 2nd Avenue L was torn down. At that time, Yorkville was a German and Central European immigrant neighborhood. Earlier this year, the Wankel family sold their building to a developer who promises to build more luxury housing on the block. Even if he were to include affordable units, the 30 families displaced by the demolition of their homes will never come back, nor will the neighborhood retail business. As terrific as the new building might be, it will not come close to the character of the former, which saw the end of the 2nd Avenue L, the Rupert Brewery just up the street, and the continual chipping away at the fabric of our city. Thank you. And I think Elizabeth is going to take item 2. I mean, unless people want to comment. Seeing none. Oh no, I see a hand. Rita. Yeah, there we go.
There are 2 questions. First of all, thank you. I think you did a fabulous job. And, you know, we just bandy about numbers, you know, telephone book numbers, whatever it is. I just received the prospectus for a new building in Spanish Harlem. And you need 138% of the adjusted median income, which means that they are displacing a lot of Wankels. And by doing so, they are gentrifying a community that has no place to go. I would like people to think about what will happen in 25 years if we don't have affordable housing in New York City. The answer actually is in China right now, having nothing to do with affordable housing, but having to do with a diminished workforce that came about when it was 1 child per family. And now they don't have enough people to work. So they've just said, okay, that was 25 years ago. Now you can have 2 children. And the millennials look at them and said, guess what? We don't want to get married. We don't want to have children. So if they don't have a workforce now with just 1 child, in 25 years, they are going to be in deeper trouble. In 25 years, we are going to be in deep, deep trouble that is not reversible, because we are not housing people who are essential to the city. That's all I have to say. I've changed my tune about affordable housing. I'm knocking my head against the wall for 14 years. What will the city be like in 25 years if we don't have affordable housing? And shame on us for saying, headline, affordable housing, 4 units out of 52 will be affordable, but affordable for who? Affordable for who? Not for somebody who is a school teacher, not affordable. So I think that as a committee, I don't know what we could do, but I think we need to stop and realize that it's more than just about the worth of a piece of land. It's about neighborhoods, it's about people, it's about today, and it's about tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Rita. And I think we now, it's Marco. Okay, on the telephone.
Marco, it's *9 to unmute. I'm sorry, *6 to unmute.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Anthony, for this introduction. I think And the way that you introduced, I know you make a lot of efforts, but it's too general, your statement. And something, I have to be in disagreement with you. The issue is when you said the lowest densities, for instance, Queens. Well, look, yeah, they can go make bigger buildings, but the problem is the infrastructure. You cannot have 2, 3, 4 family buildings if you don't have infrastructure. I'm referring water and sewer. If you don't, it's like you want to put an apartment without no bathroom. That doesn't have no sense. And that is the problem of Queens, similar in Brooklyn. So the infrastructure that was created for this neighborhood is for low density. The infrastructure created in Manhattan is for different infrastructure. So we have a high density buildings because I saw one of the sewer system in our community 6 feet high. So those people, people from the past, they really, really think great. But my point is, I don't want to go in different direction, but I'm going to pinpoint something that caught my attention. We have an opportunity not to create large amount of housing because it's too ambitious. It's hard to say. A major, the last year he said that he built 139,000 affordable units. True or not, but still we still have a serious problems of housing. But the only situation that we can have is to contribute ourselves to do something, to negotiate with the developers. The developers are coming to our community to ask welfare, and some fellow community members, they give it the welfare. We have an opportunity in these two projects to ask to build something in favor of any sector of the low-income families, and we fail because the tyranny of the majority makes the decision. So what we complain about all the urban issues or density issues or zoning issues, when we have the opportunity, we don't do that. And I think I don't want to continue, but thank you so much. I have problems with my internet, and now I'm trying to use my phone, but I have problems in the phone too. Thank you so much, Anthony.
Okay, thank you, Marco. And I think now perhaps I will turn this over to Elizabeth for our second item.
Yes, thank you very much, Anthony. And I'm just going to bring people up to date on our proposal for the two special zoning districts, the Yorkville and the Lenox Hill zoning districts. I hope every member of the community got a copy of the pre-application so that you have the details of, but we've discussed it many times, so I don't want to say too much to hold us up, because I think most people will have an idea of what we're up to. It has three components. It introduces a height limit of 210 feet. It saves the tenement buildings, and it supports local retail mom and pop. And the 210 height limit is the prevailing avenue and wide street height limit on the Upper East Side. There is no, these first, second, third, and York that are the avenues that are affected by this proposal. They are the only avenues, wide streets, and really streets at all on the Upper East Side that do not have their character and scale preserved. There is no height limit there on the Upper East Side higher than 210. It's economically feasible to build profitable buildings all over the city with a height limit of 210 feet. It accommodates not only the current maximum FAR of 10, but the bonused one for affordable housing. And there's a building that's proof of that at the northeast corner of 86th and Lexington, which not only has the 10 FAR plus the affordable housing bonus of 2 FAR plus 17,000 square feet of development rights transferred from the building to the north. So it's there to protect our scale and character like every other avenue and wide street on the Upper East Side. It also preserves the tenements, which protects all the affordable housing that is in it. It's the original character of first, second, and third, particularly. It has the affordable housing. So instead of, in addition to creating it with a bonus, saving it saves it for the people who are already in there. So I think that's a great plus for you. If you don't take them down, you don't lose them. And we're the mom and pop stores are following a proposal by the City Planning Commission to protect the sort of neighborhood character, protect nice jobs, and so thank goodness it is filed. It's starting its process. We haven't had any feedback from them, but the City Planning Commission will doubtless make requests and various things. But as we go there, we do have one big problem at the moment is that the funding that we've had has run out, and I don't know. Gail Barron who's very good on this subject and worked on it when we got the money for the planner a year or so ago, and she was going to come if she could tonight. Is Gail Barron here?
She is. Gail, confirm unmuting.
Yes, please. Yeah. Gail, if you would describe where we're going here with finances.
I don't know if they. Oh, okay. Gail?
Sorry. Hi. I had some difficulty unmuting. Excuse me. Basically, last year, when we met with Tuck and negotiated his contract, there were certain issues where you have caps as far as how much somebody can be paid unless they buy into an entire city contract, which has a lot of boilerplate. But Tuck was concerned because it looked as if he, as a small business owner, would be held liable if there were certain issues. We worked with Adele, the general counsel at Gail Brewer's office when she was the Manhattan Borough president. And she was a little concerned. Will tried very hard to figure out how we could move beyond the $20,000 cap. And at that point in time, there really was nothing that was able to be worked out. I think the most important thing is that we're almost at the end of this fiscal year. Apparently, based on what council has said, Tuck cannot be paid additional funding from this particular fiscal year. However, I think given the fact that the pre-app is filed, we now start a whole new funding cycle on July the 1st. And we'll have to sit down with Tuck, determine what his deliverables are for the next phase of the project. Particularly at this point, it would be so disappointing if we didn't figure out a way to pay him going forward, because we're already, as you said, Elizabeth, filed the pre-app, and it's taken a long time to get to this point. And we're very hopeful that planning will react positively regarding the issues that have been outlined in the pre-app. So I think that what we should be doing is when we have our CB8 budget meeting, on the 31st of the month, bring this up and try to figure out what is most doable, but ahead of that time, if at all possible, and I know it's a tight deadline, but have Tuck tell us what he views as the next steps. We can put some tentative numbers against that and then see what we're able to do with our budget, and perhaps revisit the city contracts to see if we can get some additional funding for him, and have another sit down with Tuck to discuss that in more detail. That would be my recommendation.
And I think we will go with our begging cups to the local elected officials, because the first funding came from Ben Kalos. And so anywhere we can get the money, and it also, when we get a response, if it's before we can have Tuck is our planner, by the way, before he can return to work, there may be things that we as a committee and committee members can do, like research or photography or something. And from my sad experience of getting changes to the zoning resolution, the Department of City Planning has a whole barrel full of questions that they can ask, and extra things that they want you to produce, and so on. And so perhaps we can fill in the gap there for a while. But so we'll be calling on volunteers as we go on. But I think that in my inbox, about every 4 days, another horrible proposal for first, second, third, and York comes down the pike. And I think that this is needed soon. And if we don't get it soon, this community will be damaged. And the more of these expensive tall towers for billionaires we get, the more expensive the neighborhood becomes. And where Gail and I live, which is west of Lexington, I've had people who have affordable housing who are moving because they can't afford to live in the neighborhood. And so we really want to get this fixed soon. So we will bring members of the public up to date on this as we go along. And I hope in June we have some news that we can go ahead. But that's where we are. And if any members of the public or the committee, Gail, you have something to say?
Elizabeth, I think that your point about Ben Kalos having been generous in his funding, perhaps it would be advisable for the co-chairs of zoning and development to sit down with Julie Menon and really brief her on the status where we are, what the path has been to get here, and ask her, to go ahead and support the project financially. I'm sure that it would be helpful for her to really know some of the intricacies, and also the work that you've done, Elizabeth, over the years in protecting people on this side, but not in her district. And I think she would want affordable housing and protections to take place east of Lex as well. So that would be another recommendation that I think could be helpful.
Yeah, and I've been in touch with the new borough president's office, and they want to meet with us as well. So
good.
We'll be working that with that. And okay, do any members of the public or members of the committee have any questions? Or
we don't have any other raised hands.
Okay, very good. Well, then I'll hand it back to Anthony, who is going to take the next item.
Great, thank you, Elizabeth. We've requested. Well, let's go back a little bit. Let's go back to before the pandemic. Before the pandemic, the Manhattan Borough President and Council Member Powers had a sort of task force to look at the Northwell Lenox Hill Hospital expansion, the Lexington Avenue site. And we met a number of times. This would be 2019, excuse me, 2019. The last meeting I think might have been in January of 2020. It was scheduled to be the last meeting with the hope that there might be more, but then of course the pandemic intervened. And since then, we have heard nothing in the last 2 years from Northwell. And while they were obviously busy doing hospital work, we are curious as to where the project stands at the moment. And so we have asked them to join us, not tonight, but next month, to give us some kind of an update on where they are. And it doesn't necessarily mean that we are expecting or even requesting that we see new, improved, more neighborhood-friendly plans. It's more an issue of what are they thinking about? How has the pandemic altered their views of what this hospital should be? And just to begin a kind of dialogue between our community and this very large and important institution in our midst. And likewise, the Third Avenue project, which is, as far as we know, which is not much, intended to be an as-of-right building. The program is as yet a little unclear to us. And we are asking as well that we just get some information about the status of the project and what in fact they intend to do there. And so we're hoping that they do in fact show up and that we can have an interesting and robust conversation when they do. And so that's that update. We've asked to see them. We sort of saying why we've asked them to come and visit with us, and hopefully they will do so. So we have some raised hands. Michelle.
Thanks, Anthony. With respect to Northwell, there had been a change, or at least it was reported, the change in their original plans, where they had called for a 400-foot tower on Park Avenue to be a condominium. The community was last updated, I believe, that part of the project has been abandoned. Is that actual fact? Is that true?
No, it is not. And I'm glad you brought that up because everybody thinks it's gone. It's not gone. The Northwell has said they are considering the possibility of removing the residential portion of the scheme of the project, the residential portion of the project from the project as a whole. And they did show at the last of the task force meetings, they did show an altered plan that did not include the residential tower and retained retained more of the original structure, lowered the 500-foot tower on Lexington by reducing the floor-to-floor height slightly, and making that building somewhat larger in footprint. But they were making it clear that this was a kind of visual expression of a thought experiment. I'm probably not being very fair. It's a long time ago, but that they were not necessarily abandoning the residential tower on the on Park.
Thank you. Do we understand? We had surmised that they wanted that residential tower to basically finance the rest of the project, which I'm sure is probably the case. Do we understand under what parameters they could conceivably really eliminate it, lower it? It's way out of sync with height and bulk to Park Avenue, and it would need a million variances in order to build such a thing. But and some of the people, and I believe they were even on this call, had done a little bit of a dive into their finances and determined on their look, with their preliminary look, that in fact Northwell was more than financially capable of building the hospital project without this tower. So do you have any sense, or this could be one of the questions that we ask when they come, but do you have any sense as to what it would take? What are they looking for in order to eliminate this part of the project? Or are they just thinking of a residential component, but they will make it more in keeping with the zoning on Park Avenue? Do you have any sense of where they are with how this tower would work in terms of their overall project and its financing?
No, the short answer is no. I think that there are ways for organizations the size and nature of Northwell to finance projects that to finance their construction projects that we can only imagine. So it's and in a way, it felt to the task force that was a kind of, it was the wrong direction to go down, to tell them, well, you can afford this, you don't need the residential tower. That in fact, all of the issues related to the proposed bulk of the entire block were issues that were troublesome. And I think that I don't think their finances are really, in a way, our concern. Anyway, that's what I think really on that, Michelle.
Okay, so
I think that the residential tower is probably not going to happen, but they weren't really promising that it was out of the project.
So certainly this should be a question for next month. Sure. When they're before us. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. And we have Leah Hanlon.
Hi, thank you. I have been wondering for a couple months now, what kind of precedent the Blood Tower, the New York Blood Center Tower sets for the Northwell project, because both are obviously zoning for dollars kind of projects, and I don't see any difference in offensiveness between a 500-foot tower on Park Avenue and the Blood Center Tower. They're both equally out of scale and out of place in their blocks. So what impact does the Blood Center result have for the Northwell project?
I think for me, not as, for me, I think that it's of course sets a terrible precedent because it's a kind of, it's a big rezoning, and in the case of Lenox Hill Hospital, it's a huge rezoning. And I think that the willingness of the city council to accept the argument that medical research and healthcare trumps everything, pardon the expression, is a problem. And I think that I think the success of the Longfellow Blood Center tower in the administrative process is a bad sign for resistance to the Lenox Hill expansion, frankly. But that doesn't mean that those who oppose that expansion should just throw up their hands and give up, because the disruption to that part of our neighborhood, of our community, is actually almost unimaginable. But we'll see. Does that answer your question, sort of?
I guess it does. I just was surprised that the words blood center tower had not come up before my question. I've been wondering about this, as I said, for a couple of months now.
Yeah, I don't think the two are formally connected, but I do think that they are, that there is a kind of idea connection. And
but isn't it more than that? I mean, you're right. The city council just rolled over because it was healthcare. I mean, on the one hand, maybe Park Avenue has a lot more better connected neighbors who will be offended and push back. On the other hand, maybe that cuts the other way. I just see them following exactly the same playbook, but I mean, you're the experts in this field. I'm just a member of the public.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you for the credit of expertise. But I don't think, unfortunately, we can only do what we can do on this topic.
Okay.
But thank you. And Elizabeth.
Yeah, I just wanted to pipe up that both these sites, both these areas were extremely well zoned. We got good zoning there. We got R8B, which is the mid-block zoning, perfectly scaled to the blood center site. And we've got R8B, Special Park Improvement District on Park Avenue, Lexington Avenue, which is 9X, I think it is. But anyway, very well zoned. So it's a sort of a slap in the face that we work very hard, get really good zoning, and the authorities throw it away. So I'm just as worried as you are, and I don't know. I can't say something positive here because I don't see it.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And just before I call on you, Ella, to echo what you said, the Northwell project will require a huge rezoning of that entire block. And so it's something that I think we all have to look out for and pay attention to the specifics of their proposal when it finally gets to the application stage even. Ella Baff.
Thank you very much. So what can we do?
Oh, we can do all the things that we do every time something like this comes up. I think a lot of it depends on, at least, yes, a lot of it depends on appropriate pressure on elected officials. It didn't work with the blood center. Who knows? It might work. It might work with the with Northwell, and I think the most important thing, and this is really partly why we're asking Northwell to come and speak with us next month, is that the public and the community be fully informed as to what's happening. All too often, projects just sort of sneak in under the radar. Obviously, this is too big to do that, but the earlier that we know what is going on, the better chance we have of shaping the final outcome, even if it's just a little bit. And so at this point, we need to know what it is they actually want to do, and then to speak to them about ways in which bad effects might be ameliorated, I think. Does that help? Andrew Ravishir, how are you?
I'm doing well. How about you?
Okay.
Okay. I think one really critical component in terms of fighting this problem of overdevelopment, whether it's large luxury towers or monstrously tall healthcare facilities that are really just real estate deals masquerading as healthcare projects, is that we have to be really clear with our elected officials that we cannot tolerate these projects or these developments, and that we need an absolute 210 cap. I'm thrilled that we put in the application. And I was at a forum for Indivisible, which is like a nationwide advocacy group, and they have local chapters. And Assembly District 73 has a real problem because 4 of the 5 candidates, or 4 of the candidates were present, Mr. Squire was not, they all were against height caps. And when you look at the blood center deal, I believe that after being on our side, former borough president Gail Brewer voted in favor of the deal. So I think, there are a lot of elections coming up. We might have multiple primary days because I love the city, but we can't get our act together. And it's going to be probably a low turnout affair. And so those that are really engaged and that can bring people to the polls, and that make clear to our elected officials, absolutely clear that we're not for sale, is going to be really important. And we have to make it blatantly clear. We can't skirt around the issue. We have to see what side our prospective elected officials are on, and then vote accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Okay, I think unless there are other comments, we can move to old and new business. And just before I pass the baton back to Elizabeth, just an observation that a couple of things came up within the last few days that deserve our attention. I know one of which is fully teed up, and I hope we'll have at least the beginnings of a conversation about the other. So go ahead, Elizabeth.
Okay. I would like to ask if anybody has some old business, and we've been contacted by Lo Vandervalk for Carnegie Hill Neighbors, and he wishes to present some old business to us. And if he is here, or George James, please unmute them.
Hello, you can okay, you're.
Yes, good evening. This is Lo Vandervalk speaking on behalf of Carnegie Hill Neighbors.
on the project that you considered on February the 10th, 3 East 89th, the ULIP project that was in its zoning phase, the landmarks phase having occurred some 2 years ago. In the zoning phase, this went to the City Planning Commission. Your decision was to approve was on February the 10th, and you recommended they consider two recommendations by Carnegie Hill neighbors, and that was contained in your resolution. It was then considered by the City Planning Commission on April 13. In preparing for the City Planning Commission, we hired George Janes, and tonight George Janes will be speaking on behalf of Carnegie Hill neighbors. He also advises Community Board 8, but tonight he will be speaking on our behalf. Just want to make that clear. George Janes, in his investigation, unearthed the need for a waiver that was not mentioned by the applicants. And this deals with the separation of portions of buildings in the that are required by section 23-711, separation of buildings occupying the same zoning lot. This would not, and therefore we have a second issue in the rear yard. They did ask for a variance for filling out the rear yard, the last 10 feet space of the rear yard, which, by the way, had existed for more than 100 years and was really there essentially designed by the architect that designed 3 East 89th, Ogden Codman, to allow light to come to that second floor rotunda window facing east. But however, the applicants got a waiver or sought a waiver for the rear yard, but they did not seek and did not mention a required waiver that we consider to be required for the spacing between buildings in the same zoning lot. Now, even though the tax lots are different for this large complex that was divided into 3 portions, the one on Fifth Avenue, 3 East 89th, 189th, and then its neighbor further to the east, 5-7 East 89th. But we are concerned now with the Fifth Avenue, 1083, Fifth Avenue, and 3 East 89th. And so while their tax lots are different, they occupy the same zoning lot. I suppose at this point I would like, and by the way, we informed the applicant of our objection to the decision made by CPC, and they responded, and I have submitted some documentation of that to the committee, and they had a response, and George Janes will address their response and address why we think this additional spacing was required. Okay, George, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, great. It would be wonderful if I could just share an image, if that's possible.
Yes.
You should have the ability
Okay.
now.
Good, thank you. Okay. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. So this is a very narrow technical zoning issue. And let me make that very clear. And there were 2 issues that we discussed. The first one, which had to do, the first one we're abandoning because they showed a part of a building wall in their drawings, but it's actually part of the adjacent building. And because it's part of the adjacent building, we feel that it's fine. The second portion that we're talking about is the building spacing rule regarding this addition in the rear. Now, This is existing conditions. This is 3 East. This is 1083 Fifth Avenue. This is the tiny rear yard. No one can see this area, right? This is the opposite side of the street. This is the addition that they planned in red. And so they're filling in the rear yard, as Lo just said, and also the side over here at the top, as you're well aware. And then this is with when you follow the building spacing rules in 23711. All right. So what does 23711 say? It's saying that if you have buildings on the same zoning lot, they have to have minimum building spacing between them, depending on window and wall condition and the level above the ground. Lo had suggested this compromise as a compromise position where you would still allow light to get into the rotunda here, and there's a rotunda window here. But you still, essentially step back as you go up, which is really the intention of the building spacing, is that lower down you could be closer, higher up you have to be further away. Now, the applicant's attorney sent you all a letter, or sent a letter in, and they said, per zoning resolution 2382, at levels where the buildings are connected, as they are at levels 2nd and 3rd floor enlargement, the minimum distance provisions of 23711 do not apply. Okay, let's go back over here. So the buildings are connected here, and we all agree that 23711 applies above it. What they're saying is that below it, it doesn't apply. And let's read the section of the zoning resolution that is quote. At any level at which 2 portions of a single building or abutting buildings on a single zoning lot are not connected to one another, such portions shall be deemed to be 2 separate buildings, and the provisions set forth in the section 2371, 237011 shall apply. That's the section he's quoting. Now, if his interpretation is correct, what they're saying is you could have like 100-foot long buildings, 200-foot long buildings, and let them be connected by a 1-foot connector between them. And so you get you could ignore everything else in the building spacing, which is not true. That's an absurd interpretation of 2382. And it's, at least, listen, in my opinion, it's absurd. One of the things I've learned doing zoning for a while is to be humble. And there may be an interpretation that the DOB or a building bulletin from the DOB that deals with this that I'm not aware of. But just reading the plain language of the text suggests that you need a waiver for this. Now, again, it's they asked for a ton of, several waivers for this, and they should have asked for this one, and they did not. And this is something that, Lo believes is material, and they should have asked for it. And really, it's up to you in terms of your understanding as this committee is that, they omitted this waiver. Would it have been material for your decision making? Lo, that's all I have.
Yeah. Am I still on unmute?
We can hear you.
We can hear you.
Yeah. Yeah. So we think it is material. Filling in that rear yard. If you look at all the red in that proposed conditions, that's a lot of square feet. And even though the big discussion had been on the rooftop, the penthouse rooftop addition that was opposed by 1080 Fifth Avenue, I mean, this rear yard infill is quite substantial in terms of square feet. But more than that, I think the issue that we have is because these buildings were separated for tax reasons and the separate tax lots to make the sales of the separate buildings possible. This community board cannot ignore the conditions of the combined zoning lot under which this application was filed. And for example, the applicant listed two separate height limitations, one being the 60-foot height, minimum height required for what we call a sliver building, because its street width is less than 45 feet, and the other was the 75-foot height limit of R8B, and this building seeks, I think, a height of about 95 feet, and so it violated those two zoning conditions, and it mentioned both of them. And so it isn't appropriate to say for the rear yard well, or we mentioned the rear yard requirement and we got a waiver for that, and not to mention this building spacing requirement. No mention of it whatsoever. And that is a serious lack in the ULURP process. And we think that, what's left, it's been approved by the City Planning Commission. It will now go to the City Council, and the City Council will defer to the opinions of the council member of this district, who is Keith Powers. So, possibly a letter to Keith Powers pointing out this serious lapse, because if you deem that you can leave out parts of the zoning requirements, waivers, if you can omit waivers in your ULURP process that should have been there, then it really tarnishes the ULURP process. That's the whole purpose of the ULURP process, is that everyone gets a chance to review every waiver. So that is our position. And I turn it back to the committee chairs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lo, and thanks very much for this excellent presentation, George. And when you're asking them to consider this particular waiver, is your objective to, because under 74-711 they probably can waive this as well, is your objective to just make them address this, or to deny the waiver?
Well, I think the objective is to acknowledge that a waiver is needed, and then to ask the community board, to either approve or deny the waiver as you do in the normal process. They asked you for something, you gave them permission, or you voted on it, but they didn't ask you everything. And that's the point, is that they asked for 5 waivers and they needed 6. And the point is that they should come back and they should ask you if you still approve the project or not. I mean, that's my opinion. Lo may very well think differently.
Lo, have you something?
Yeah, I agree with George, although, this does throw a hammer into their application process. Technically, George is correct. If this waiver is indeed required, and we think it is. So that's going to be one point of consideration. However, we're also trying to be practical and constructive, and we've looked at what if this waiver is indeed required? What could we minimally live with? Okay, and give them what they need and still allow light and air to that window that sits there by itself. That's a huge window. It's a very celebrated window. It's made the cover of books on Ogden Codman's inside decorations, which he wrote with Edith Wharton, interior decorations. And that window is 15 feet tall by 6 feet, but it's not it does not represent the habitable space behind that window because it's a hallway. But here this window has been relegated to a bathroom window or a hallway window, but it's huge and it was important to the project. And Ogden Codman, when he designed this, allowed for this 10-foot rear yard space when no one else at that time in the 1910s valued rear yard space. Everybody built up to the rear property line. He created this space for light and air to that window. So that's an important consideration. And that's why we took it up, because we think that even though this is in private hands, there's no reason that in the future, and because the owner has put so much attention into restoring the building, there's no reason in the future that it might not once again fall into the public domain by donation or whatever other means. So we want to be very protective of important neighborhood character, even though you cannot see it from the street. You can see the window facing south from the street, so you can see part of the rotunda that it represents. Okay, going back to what could be done, we have offered a sort of a practical alternative that gives them, I think, more than half of what they want and still allows light and air to come into the window. And if agreement could be reached on that, that would be a compromise and that would allow the process to go forward rather than throwing a monkey wrench into the whole ULURP process and requiring them to go back to square one. And, you know, sometimes you get clobbered when you offer a compromise, because then they start to whittle that compromise away and get most of what they want. This is really meant to be a minimum compromise. And otherwise, we would say throw it back to the community boards, full consideration, go back to ULURP, open up the project completely again and redo the ULURP. But we offered this as a constructive way of solving the problem. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just speaking for myself. I very much don't want the rules bent or ignored. So I'm all for upholding the regulations in the previous examples that we were discussing. So you want to get it straight, and you want to defend the correct zoning that you got. Okay, Michelle?
Yeah, I agree with that. So with that in mind, what is the protocol here for going forward? If they are disputing that paragraph, they and George has a different take on it, will a letter from the community board asking not only them, but city planning to look at this and to make a decision? Or does it go to the owner developer to see whether or not they will accept your compromise? If they're denying it's an issue, I don't see why they would accept the compromise. It seems to me that they'll be willing to have a fight over it. But the question is, how do we go forward in an effort not to ask for a completely new ULURP process? Or do you feel that if you get resistance to this little friendly arrangement, that we should ask for a new ULURP? And in either one of those cases, what is the correct protocol for going forward? Does it have to go back to a committee or a board vote? Or can any scenario be solved with a letter that is approved by the chair, but written by this committee? So what's the protocol? Elizabeth, Anthony, whoever?
I think we can do a letter without a resolution. And that means that we can do something well in advance of the next full board meeting. And it probably makes sense to do that. And I think, not having thought it through completely fully, that a letter to city planning and council member Powers sort of explaining, elucidating the issue at hand, and saying that, and I think maybe saying we'd rather come to some sort of acceptable compromise, acceptable to all parties, without having to start the Euler process over again.
Yes, I would definitely agree with that. And I want to thank Lo for taking the path that he's taking here, and also George for his work as well. City planning did hear some of this information, and I think that it is worthwhile to better understand to better understand how they address the question. And I'm wondering, and this might be a tad bit unfair, but I'm wondering, Lo, if you would, or if George would talk about how city planning responded to these issues that you're raising, because they did respond.
Yeah, George, you take
Well,
that.
I mean, they responded to, we have the City Planning Commission report where they talked about this, and they've essentially repeated what the attorney for the applicant said, is that this waiver isn't required because their reading of that section, which I had shown, their reading of it is that it's not required below the level where there are connections, even though this part of the buildings aren't connected. And again, the way I like to think about these things is to think about these things in an extreme and to see if it makes any sense. And, as I was saying earlier, is that you could have very, very long buildings that are attached in a very, very small area. And, then you can ignore everything underneath that. This interpretation is the solution for infill on height factor projects. I mean, part of the problem with these big height factor estates, we don't have very many here, but like Holmes Towers is one of the few, is that, building spacing rules prevent buildings being very close to each other. Anthony knows about this. And if you connected them, however, essentially you get a mulligan for everything below where they're connected, which, is not the intention of that section of the zoning resolution. And it is a reading. It's a reading that I think is incorrect. And it is what city planning has put forth. Now, city planning is city planning. I don't know how much thought they put into this. And I don't know what the Department of Buildings, which has the responsibility for interpreting the zoning resolution, would say about it. So it's a difference of opinion, but I encourage everybody to read what the words say, right? The plain language words suggest that it applies here.
May I just follow up with my thought that I had originally started? Because if what you're saying is the reading of this is a difference of opinion, and the opinion of city planning is siding with the applicant,
they are,
then without a formal legal challenge, why would the applicant agree to any kind of compromise when the agency they're applying to is on their side? The only thing I could suggest is Dan Gorodnick was not with city planning at the time of this application, but he is now, and he is an attorney. And I'm wondering if you should make, or we should make, a direct appeal to him that the interpretation of this is up for question, and somehow get somebody at city planning on our side. Otherwise, the applicant has absolutely no incentive to do anything. And I think if in the letter you could point to the slippery slope as it pertains to potentially larger buildings and more bulk and all that, and how this could be badly used going forward, that might help in an argument. But I think that writing directly to Dan Garodnick at this point is probably the best option, because we are asking the City Planning Commission to go against its own written opinion. And I don't see that that's happening without going to their leadership and getting a new fresh pair of eyes on this, and hoping that perhaps he'll, if he doesn't see it completely our way, that he might bring it up for discussion.
Yeah,
So,
I think we should do that, Michelle, as well as send a letter to Keith Powers. I would be very interested in knowing what the process would be for re-examining something that the commission has already opined on. And we'll only know that once we send a letter to Dan Garodnick as well as Keith Powers.
agreed.
I think that we should, if we write, we should write to Dan and copy all the elected officials if necessary. But I think the only position we really can take is that we are concerned with what we see or what has been presented to us as a discrepancy in their interpretation of the zoning resolution, and ask them to re-examine it. I don't see us able really to do anything other than that. But anyhow, okay. We have a member of the public,
Boaz.
Mr.
Boaz
Boaz.
Galil. Yes. I don't know the entire story here, but here is my opinion. The first thing, if the community board approved this project, and it seems like it was approved by mistake because a waiver, a piece of paper was missing, the community board need to send out a letter saying that, okay, we made a mistake. You know, people making a mistake, and let's start the process from the beginning, and maybe expedite it, but it is what it is. The second thing, we need to understand how to avoid the situation in the future, meaning that how do we know that, I mean, it seems like that there was a waiver that was missing. How can we know that there is no like 5 other waivers that are missing? So what can we do? And I think that maybe the community board need to take an action to reach out to the decision maker and maybe to help clarify the zoning laws that will be a little bit more clear of what is needed and what is needed from the community board. Maybe create some kind of a checklist. You know, okay, whenever a new project comes to the community board, we need to check that they have this piece of paper, that piece of paper, that certificate, and so on. And that's basically from my end. Thank you.
Judy Schneider, thank you very much.
Yes, I have kind of a procedural question. Since this is being brought up under old, new business, whatever, it hasn't been posted to the community. How can we write a letter on behalf of the whole community board if the community wasn't given notice and given a chance to come and speak on this particular item? I mean, doesn't that have to be something that maybe next month is posted
and then take action on it?
If necessary, we can take it up again in June.
I mean, that's my question.
I see Michelle shaking her head. Michelle?
While the community isn't here tonight, the community was very, very well represented at our past meetings on this issue. Those people in the community who spoke in favor of this project and those who spoke against the project, their opinions would not differ based on this little technicality. So I don't think that posting is necessary for something like this. This is a clarification that the community board wants and that a major community organization wants, and it's being requested with support of a city planner who also did evaluation. And it also recalls the communications between these parties. So for this particular issue, the public is very, very well aware of the project, very cognizant of what's going on there. This bit of, I won't say it's minutia, because it may be a bit of minutia at this project, although I would like to see that window have the light that it's supposed to have. But it's more important for a slippery slope and for other projects, and also to get a final answer as to the interpretation of that paragraph. And as I say, with the new chair of the commission, who is also an attorney, we have a good opportunity. We don't know if he'll agree with the point of view or not, but we'll have a good opportunity to have a pair of fresh legal eyes on the matter. So I think letters, I don't think it's an issue at all in terms of notification.
Michelle, I just want to say, I don't disagree with what you're saying about Dan, but I do think that we have to follow proper procedure. And since the community wasn't noticed, I don't think any of us can say how the community is going to respond if it's noticed and who's going to turn out and what they're going to say. I'm just talking about procedure here now. I'm not talking about the item.
Judy, I think that if we are focused entirely on the zoning question and not taking any position, we're not taking a position on whether the application is good, bad, or indifferent. What we're questioning is a legal interpretation, and it could be applied to another building. It just coincidentally applies to this one. I think if we keep it strictly on asking them to revisit an interpretation of a section of the zoning resolution, I don't think that matters whether, because it may or may not affect the what is built there. But I think if we keep it strictly legal, and we don't really have to, because I don't think the neighborhood is involved. You know, it doesn't affect the neighborhood. I think if we just concentrate on the legal question, we can do that.
Okay, Elizabeth, I'm just giving my opinion. Please proceed.
And I'm going to ask Anthony to take over, because I have to mute myself to keep somebody quiet,
That's
namely
fine.
my dog.
Okay. All right, Elizabeth. Craig.
Thank you. I just want to concur with Judy's comments and just add that I don't think it is appropriate that, even if it's not an issue of the application itself, that the applicant not have the opportunity to be able to speak and be part of this discussion without posting in addition to the community, as was suggested. And that if we do want to address this as a legal issue, we should have this as an agenda item and actually list the issue itself and have that become the crux of the discussion that could lead to a letter. So we all are coming from the same page and not appearing as if we're targeting a specific proposal that could be perceived as us trying to revisit something that we've already settled in the past.
Thank you, Craig. Just one point. The applicant was informed that this would be a topic of new/old business, and declined to join us, merely restating their position that city planning said it was okay. And just, I think the way that Elizabeth actually framed the discussion, that we are asking for an interpretation of the zoning resolution, is in fact largely unconnected to this particular project. And I don't know, I will confess freely to not knowing the rules, the posting rules, but it seems to me that logically we should be able to write a letter asking that question. And we now have Barry.
Good evening and welcome back. Oh, I'm welcoming back. Very quickly, I'm troubled by the idea that a letter from a committee that represents less than 20% of the membership of the board is going to a city agency. I would feel more comfortable if it had, as has been suggested, that the meeting had been scheduled, the item had been scheduled on a meeting, that the public is aware, that all the board members were aware of it, they could have shown up. You pass a resolution, it goes to the full board votes on it, and then a letter or a resolution is sent. But a letter coming from less than 20% of the membership, I think, is inappropriate.
Thank you, Barry. And I guess it has been the practice of, I'll get to you, Michelle. It has been the practice of many committees, not just this one, to in fact write letters without resolutions, without full board conversations about them. That's part of what makes a letter different from a resolution. This is not so big an issue, I think, frankly, that it warrants spending all of the time next month. And if we meet next month and do a resolution, then perhaps we take it up in September at the full board meeting in September, by which time the city council will have voted on the ULURP application as it stands. So on the one hand, yes, I understand how we should always act with an excess of caution. But on the other hand, I'm not so sure that this is necessarily of such import that we should be spending a lot of the full board's time discussing it. But that's just my opinion.
I'll defer to the chair. Thank you, sir.
Michelle.
Yeah, I was just going to echo that letters come out of committees all the time. That's one of the mechanisms of committees making thoughts known or asking questions without having resolution. So this is not unusual. However, what we can do in this case, since there seems to be some concern, is write a letter disputing the zoning issue only as per Elizabeth's comments, and not include Lowe's drawings, which now indicate a design suggestion. I think if we get a ruling about the interpretation, then that would be an opportunity for Lowe and his community to say, and we have a solution for this. But if we can't get another opinion on the zoning discrepancy, then the owner is not going to accept a compromise that it need not make, unless we can appeal to the owner directly on its interest in maintaining light through that very large window, which maybe they would be interested in doing. Maybe they didn't hear about it. But in terms of the committee writing a letter with these parameters, it happens all the time. And of course, it has to be with the approval of the chair. So I think that's the next step, but you can narrow the letter if there is some concern. I wouldn't belabor this much more, as Anthony implies. I think we have a good handle on it.
Shut up.
Who said that? Who is unmuted enough to say that? At any rate, that's not what it's going to take to shut me up. When I finish my point, I'll be finished. So that would be my suggestion, and I would like us to move on.
Thank you, Michelle.
Excuse me, I do apologize. Saida, do we have an idea as to who that individual was? I'm not asking for any names. I just would like to know, do you?
Yes.
You do?
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon.
Can he be placed or she be placed in the waiting room?
Sure.
Thank you.
No more barking.
Okay. Do you want me just to finish this up?
Craig?
Oh, okay.
Craig? Later?
Craig, confirm unmuting.
Yes, hi. I was just waiting to be unmuted. I was just going to say, I wasn't sure why we kept referring to September as our time frame. We do have a full board meeting in July. So if we did take something up next month, it would be heard well before any September deadlines.
Okay, is
Craig, do you know for sure if we're having a full board meeting in July?
In my 8 years on the board, we've never not had a July meeting. We already have scheduled agenda items for
Hope
committee
springs
meetings in July.
what is the timing for you, George, and for you, Lo? I mean, if we put it forward too much, does it become irrelevant to you?
Craig?
I think
George
the question
or
is
Lo?
directed to George Janes or
Oh, I'm sorry, Craig.
or Lowe.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a low question, but I will say there is a ULURP timeline, and that City Council will be voting on this sometime in June.
Thank you, George.
Lo, you can confirm.
Am I unmuted? Okay, great. Well, I think we do have the deadline of the city council vote on this. So one of the avenues that we haven't really explored is the council member in whose district the project is can influence that vote and can encourage a discussion with the applicant. But I don't know the exact deadline, but it is, ULURP is on a very tight schedule. And I would even, we would even have to research if that vote comes after the June meeting of this community board, and we should alert Keith Powers that that there's a deadline consideration here. So if we are to have an effect, and otherwise, if this can't be handled through the processes that we have been discussing, that leaves the challenger, Carnegie Hill Neighbors, with only the alternative of some kind of lawsuit, and those are expensive, and lawsuits should not be a normal procedure for resolving issues of this kind. It would be our hope that we could do this without a lawsuit, because lawsuits are expensive and they drag out the process. I mean, you could say, well, Carnegie Hill Neighbors is doing this to drag out the process to prevent us from building this thing by another year or two. So, there are two sides to this. So I hope you will take this into account. And that's why I think our only appeal, short of starting the process over again, is to the CPC. But I can't see the City Planning Commission easily reversing itself on this decision, because it had considered it specifically, as we've seen from the records that I've shared with you. And therefore, it then falls on Keith Powers. And I don't think Keith Powers will move without a recommendation from the community board. So those are the variables I think you have to take into account. Thank you.
Thank you, Lau.
Thank you. Gail Barron?
Thank you. It seems to me that given what appears to be a pretty tight time frame, what we really want is an interpretation. George is certainly reading the language in one way. We just want to know if that's accurate or not. So if we send a letter out quickly, and it, as Elizabeth has suggested with Michelle's agreement as well, something that's very targeted. That's what we really want to understand. Are they in compliance or not? That doesn't seem to me as if we need to have any delay, as long as the majority of the committee agrees with that. So I would recommend that we proceed with a letter and find out whether or not George's interpretation is accurate or not. We should know one way or the other. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Gail. There's, I guess, barking silenced in the background. Okay. I think then what I believe that much of the sense of what I've heard, or what we've all heard, is that a narrowly focused letter to city planning asking for a formal interpretation of the this portion of the zoning resolution is in order, and aside from, and I guess we need a sense of whether people agree that we should be doing this or not, maybe a thumbs up or raised hands that Saida could, because I don't think we need a formal vote. I think we just need a sort of sense of whether or not we think it's a good idea to ask the question.
We have about 5 thumbs up.
Okay, so that's more than half of us. I believe we are 9. And so we will, the chairs will write a letter, which we will pass through through Russell, and to try and get some kind of quick evaluation of what this bit of zoning really means. And I think since Elizabeth is still muted, I am going to ask if there is any new business. And I would hope at this point that Adam might want to say something, even if it's "I told you so," about a rezoning.
I don't want to be an "I told you so" type of guy, but there is an application was recently filed for a rezoning of the East 94th Street between 2nd and 3rd. That's correct, right? 2nd and 3rd. That block that's currently zoned M14. This was an application that I knew was coming, and I think several members of the community board knew was coming, and they had been contemplating this. The applicant had been contemplating this for a number of years at this point. We don't know the full scope and scale of the anticipated project, but I am been led to believe that it is not in line with some of the options that we have put forth for the M14 and C84 rezonings with respect to height. Density, I'm not sure. I believe it's a 12 FAR density, which we had also considered for some of the stretches of the M14 and the C84 zonings. At this point, until we see the application, it's tough to know what it's going to look like, but it's just something to be aware of.
Yeah, I thank you, Adam. I think it's something that should be on our radar, and I don't know how long before the details of the application will surface, and maybe in the course of the next month. I think without having spoken to Elizabeth and Sharon about this in advance, I think that we should think of it as an agenda item for next month.
I mean, we should invite them. Yes.
Yes, we absolutely should invite them, and we will do that so that we can the same reason we want to talk to the people from Northwell Lenox Hill. We want to get information as early as we can, in the hope that we might be able to at least somewhat shape what they are proposing. I see actually Sharon has her hand up, even though she can speak without raising her hand.
Yes, I just wanted to be the last person to speak if there's no other new business or old business. I just wanted to take maybe 30 seconds. We've had 18 children killed in Texas. And I know that this is a bit unusual, and forgive me, but I'm sure that it has impacted you as much as it has impacted me. And if we could take maybe just a few seconds of silence, given what has happened in Texas. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. I see we blew it because Peggy also has her hands up.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just wondered if we had any idea when we might hear back about the 210 height limit proposal. Do you have a rough estimate about when that could happen?
I don't think that, unfortunately, until they actually formally respond, there's no clock. So I think that hopefully within this next month, we should hear something.
I think my understanding is it's supposed to be 45 days.
I know that, but they have a lot of wiggle room at the front end of it.
Okay.
That's the problem, which someone else said to me. I didn't know one way or the other, but I think in fact it's yes, it is 45 days, but I think that the start date can drift a little.
Thank you.
It's been my experience, sadly, that you can forget about that. city planning will, if they don't want this, and they probably won't, because we've been talking with them a couple of years ago, wasn't it, Anthony? And I would hardly describe them as enthusiastic. They have practice of thinking of something else you should do, something else you should provide, something else you should find. And one of the things that I worked on the Madison Avenue height limits, and they ran out of things to do. They lost the application twice. So there's real artistry in taking a long time. I don't want to, it happens, we got it, but when you read nice things like 25 days here and 45 days there, it sounds good on paper, but I wouldn't count on it. Any more new business? Any suggestions about adjourning?
Move to adjourn.
Seconded by Gail Barron.
Yes. And if there's no objection, we will see you down the road. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.